Okay, humans, we're going to make a plaster with Zhizi, the gardenia seed, and Daikon juice or luóbo juice, the Chinese kind of radish. So this is a recipe that I got from Xuē Jǐ, who is was a Ming Dynasty doctor, and he used this plaster for treating blood stasis due to trauma. And so that's what we're going to do. I decided to do this today because I'm making, I like to ferment vegetables, and I'm making a new batch of salt fermented daikon. And I thought that to make the daikon juice, I'd use like the ends from chopping it up. So here's my little, Chinese fermentation pot. Here's my daikon. And so I'll make that, but I'm also going to make the Zhizi and daikon plaster. Probably, Zhizi is this seed from the gardenia plant, and it can be ground into a powder. Okay, the label. So this is just the seed that I've ground up in my herb grinder, and then if I need to make up the plaster, I'm ready to go. I've already got it ground. So basically, what we're going to do then is, there are different ways you could make some juice from the daikon. I don't have a juicer, so I can't just juice it that way. But what I've tended to do, and it seems to work pretty well, is that I put some of it in an old blender that I have with just the minimum of water, and then I totally liquefy it, puree it, whatever you want to call it, and then I strain out the juice. So it's slightly diluted with a small amount of water, but it seems to work just fine. So why are we, combining these two herbs? Of course, you're probably familiar with Zhizi, which is cold and bitter. Taken internally, it's a pretty strongly cold herb, and used externally like this, it's going to focus on moving blood. So it's good for blood stasis, and it's cooling, therefore it can be used in relatively new injuries. However, the doctor I got this from, Xuē Jǐ, the Ming Dynasty doctor, he was really all about warm supplementation. So even when he needed to use cooling herbs, he was very careful not to overdo it. So daikon is warm and acrid and somewhat bitter. And it also is applied topically, traditionally, besides being used as food. Maybe you're familiar with Laifuzi, which is its seeds. It's used in Baohe Wan. So the daikon, when used externally, is also moving blood, but it's warming, and so therefore it can counterbalance some of the coldness of the Zhizi. So we've got a very cold herb that moves blood and a pretty warm herb that moves blood, and therefore this formula will not be excessively cooling when applied topically, and yet it'll still be relatively on the cool side. So it's better for new injury than for old injury. So I'm going to make the Zhizi juice now. So here we go. I'm going to, the Zhizi, the daikon itself, I'm going to use for making paocai, making fermented vegetables, but I'm like cutting off the ends, the part I don't want to use. And so now I've got, these little pieces. Okay, let's put this to the side. Okay, and I've got a blender. Okay, I'm not really good at organizing this stuff. So here we go. Sorry, stuff's falling off. Plug this in. Okay. So this is my, old blender. I've had it, I don't know, 30 years or something like that. It's a pretty old-fashioned kind. So I'm just gonna actually maybe I'll give them a little chop to make them smaller pieces to save some of the poor old blender's chi, and put them in. And then I'm pouring in a little bit of water, not very much. And let's see. Okay, this is going to be, a loud, ugly sound. What can you do? Okay, sorry about that. One more little spin. Okay. Oh, I missed a little piece. This is a cloth, just a cotton bag that I use for herbal stuff. So I'm gonna pour, let's see, here we go. There's still a bunch of stuff in there. I have resigned myself to the fact that I'm a bit of a klutz, and that's okay. There's still more in here, but I think we'll have enough juice. So I'm squeezing this more than enough juice. Okay. Put this over here. Rinse my hands. Okay. So now I've got a bowl of Zhizi juice, and I'm going to pause the video and move on to the next stage. Okay. So now I need to tell you about a few things before I actually make the plaster. You need a couple of supplies. These are sterile gauze pads. They don't have to be sterile, but that's what you can find. The size will depend on the area that you're trying to cover once somebody's been injured. There's also this stuff that I found recently. It's called cover roll stretch. And it comes in different widths. This is the 4-inch width, and these gauze pads are 3 by 3, so you want the tape to be bigger than the pad. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to open one of these. Remember, it doesn't have to be sterile at the time of use, because we're not using this on an open wound, just on like a bruise, a contusion. So I've got my sterile pad, and I need to cut off a piece of this that the sterile pad will, fit within. So it has to have enough, edge on all 4 sides. It is marked with a grid, so you can see where you want to cut. So I'm going to cut across this line. Okay. Put that over there. So basically then this thing, you can open it up from the middle, like a Band-Aid, it's hard to do when I'm trying to face the camera. Okay. And you don't want to take the paper covering totally off. So I've just kind of folded it back. I'm going to take the sterile gauze, and I want to make sure that you can get one layer off the top. So I have to figure out which end is which. Okay. So there. I need to have like the ability to like make a flap. So now I have a flap that I can fold over. Okay, so I'm gonna stick this in the center. It's really hard to do when you're trying to do it in front of the camera. Okay, I'm gonna stick this in the center so there's edge around all the sides. I can cover this back up for the time being. I can even, you know, kind of close it back up temporarily. Okay, we're ready to go. Now when we're ready to apply it, I will come back to this thing. Okay, so here's a little glass bowl. I'm using glass so you can see what I'm doing. A spoon, and we're going to take some of the Zhizi powder and put it in the bowl. It doesn't have to be measured whatever amount. Of course, if you're covering a large area, you need more. If you're covering a small area, you need less. And then the Zhizi juice. So yeah, you could just spoon it on or whatever. You could use a pipette, however you pronounce this thing, and, you know, put it in. Probably need a little bit more. And stir. It's really quite simple. This is what you do right at the time of use, not in advance. Okay. And you want to make it a really thick paste. You don't want it to be runny. Almost there. Okay, I'm just checking if it will hold together. It's still slightly dry. You know, I'm actually not practicing at the moment, so it's not like I do this every day. So some of you who cook more than me or use things every day, you'll be able to do it right the first time. Me, I'm a little slow, but that's okay. I can still show you how to do it even if I'm slow. So I think that's a good texture. You can kind of mush it and it stays, but it's not drippy. So I'm moving the daikon juice out of the way. You could, the extra daikon juice, you could freeze in like an ice cube tray, you know, and then when you need it, you take out one ice cube and melt it, and then you could use it. So it's not like you have to get a new daikon every time. Okay, so I've got this, and I've got my little pad. I'm going to open it back up again. Let's see, you can see this. And I'm going to take off that top layer of gauze. Kind of stuck a little. You know, you can do this at this part of sticking the gauze on at the time of use. I did it a little in advance. Okay, so we're going to take this and spread it in here. I don't know if we'll need it all. So I'm just, you know, just like spreading peanut butter or something like that. I'm trying to make a nice, thick, but even layer. It doesn't always cooperate perfectly. It doesn't have to be beautiful. I'm sure if you have more experience, you can make it beautiful, you know, but even if it's ugly, it'll get the job done. Okay. Yeah. Basically, we've got it. This little piece needs to stick down. Okay. Now this one layer of gauze that I have, we can fold it. Sorry, it's stuck. Should have done this like right when I was ready to use it. This little bit of layer of gauze I can fold back over. And the reason for doing this is when you remove it, it'll come off with less mess. So maybe you can see I've got the layer of herbs and a layer of gauze on top. You don't have to do that, but it does make it neater, and the gauze is not thick enough that it's going to prevent contact with the skin. So now if I wasn't quite ready, like if I was expecting the patient to come in, in a half hour, I could cover it back up. Or I could even make a few in advance and send the patient home with them. You could put this carefully in a Ziploc bag and store it in the refrigerator for a couple days, not forever. If it's too dry, when they're ready to use it, you could drip a little bit more Daikon juice in it, but let's say I'm going to use it right away, then it's you make it to the texture you want. Before I apply it, I want to talk a little bit about, I'm sure many of you have heard of that Sān Huáng Sǎn, which is a formula that Tom Bisio talks about a lot. He calls it herbal ice. And it's got, these cold, bitter herbs to apply to new injuries instead of ice, because, as he says, ice is for dead things. I agree with him, and Xuē Jǐ, the doctor I've been talking about, would totally agree with him about that. But the problem is people just mix this with water or with egg white or with whatever, and it's so cold. And Xuē Jǐ, the doctor I've spent a lot of time translating and hanging out with, at least in my mind, he is a warm supplementation guy, and he would just think this is way too cold and bitter. So if you want to use it, my suggestion is to mix it with Daikon juice or even ginger juice instead of water or other things, and then you could apply it in the same way to the affected site, but then it's not quite so cold, yet it will still do the trick. But when you think about what to combine it with, it should be something that adds to the actions of it. So since Daikon also moves blood, that's perfect. You could also think of mixing it with like some huangjiu, some yellow liquor, or even some baijiu, because alcohol also is warming and helps to move things. But otherwise, without mixing it with something a little warming, I would think this is way too cold. And I will point out, I tried to do some research on where did this formula come from. So I searched in the internet in Chinese, and there's a whole lot of formulas. There's like 20 formulas that are called Sān Huáng Sǎn, and they're mostly, the ones that are for topical application are for things like boils and abscesses and sores that are all like, infected and red and stuff like that. And there is no historical recipe that uses this for trauma. So maybe it comes from his teacher. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's just awfully cold, and you should consider that. Yes, we may want a little bit of cooling in a new injury, but why go to such an extreme? So, okay, I'm going to pause one more time, and then I'm going to show you how to apply this. Okay, I'm going to apply this now. Let's say I had injured, my knee on the side here. So basically, then you take it and you just pull off the little, strips that keep it covered, and then you put it over the affected site, and you tape it on all four sides. Make sure it's really sealed and pressed in, and then this should stay on for, it could stay on, you could change it once a day and replace it. Okay, so that's basically the application. Of course, you can use all kinds of formulas. You could use just plain old medical tape and tape it on, just gauze and medical tape. You could do all kinds of variations. So that's how it's applied. It would be left on for a few days. So finally, My daikon is all in here. I've got the brine that's been, the salt and the water are mixed together in proper proportion, and there are also some herbs and spices that when the water was hot I put in. And so now, can I do this without spilling too much? Soon I will have salt fermented daikon. Okay, it's filled up, all the daikon is covered. I do have a fermentation weight in there. We'll put the lid on. We'll put the second lid on, and then this has a water lock. So now we pour some water on top to seal the water lock, and in a couple of days I will have some nice salt fermented daikon. Okay, that's it. That's today.